In a very poignant scene, Shahid Kapoor's Heather asks, "Hum hain ke hum nahi?" Now, that is a question that the queer community in India has been asking for years. We exist, we have rights. And now, post the verdict from the Supreme Court, the government is taking some action, but now there are policy provisions that need to be changed, and there are suggestions, there are initiatives, there are proposals coming in from the queer community. We're speaking to some of the people working on these policy provisions. I'm being joined by Namrata from Vidhi Legal, Senior Advocate Arundhati Karju, and Akshay from KSF. Thank you very much for speaking to us on this issue. So, before we go into the specifics of the policy proposals, if we can go into your experiences as people working in this field as well as people who are in the community to look at, has there been a major societal change between Naz to Navtej to Supriyo? How have things changed? If you can give us your view, your personal view on this. Namrata?
Sure, I can start. I'd be really honest, actually, I was in law school when Suresh Kaushal came out, which is the judgment that recriminalized homosexuality. And I remember, being in law school at the time, I think when NAS was happening, which is the Delhi High Court petition, I remember, lawyers speaking to the fact that it was difficult to find people who would be willing to come out of the closet, as we frame it, and, present their stories to the court. But I think after NAS happened, there was a shift in terms of, being seen by the law not as a criminal for the first time. But that was reversed immediately after with Kaushal. I think what you would imagine is that after a regressive judgment like that, you would assume that the community would, go back into the closet or take a step back. But I remember being in law school, being really young, I saw that it made people angry, and people decided to not be pushed back despite of a regressive decision like that. And I think there was a scale of consolidation and mobilization that happened post Kaushal that I hadn't witnessed, which I've only seen expand over time. And so even, despite of a judgment like Supriyo, which has denied marriage equality to the queer community, the sense that I get is that people have come together and have started having conversations about what next. So despite the losses and also many wins, like with Navtej and with Nalsa, I do think the shift is that the community is mobilizing, the community is out, and losses in court are not necessarily disincentivizing us from claiming rights. If anything, I think it's acted as motivation for us to try harder.
Right.
So,
Let
that's
me
how I
take
think
this
it.
question to
Yeah.
Arundhati. You've been on the forefront of the legal battle. You're also out and proud with your partner. How has this entire change in law in society, how can you give us your experience of this entire shift over the last several years?
I think the thing is that as we change, society also changes, right? As we become more comfortable claiming space, living our lives openly, the world around us also changes, and people have different journeys. But I think by seeing our lives, by seeing the love that we have for each other, the work that we do, people change, right? Societies change, nations change. And I'm a big votary of the fact that change can be slow. And sometimes it seems like it's very quick, and people want things to change very quickly. And change can be uneven. And setbacks can be, of course, very upsetting and very demoralizing. And as losing marriage equality was, or as the Kaushal judgment was. But you learn from that and you move forward. And if you just look at this policy report, for example, right? So it's called Beyond Supriyo. What are we thinking of now after losing the case for marriage equality? What comes next? And in a sense, the Supreme Court also sets that out, because it asks the government to set up this committee. And what are the asks of the committee? They go much beyond Supriyo. I mean, they look at marriage equality, and that's actually the first volume of this report. But then you also talk about housing, you're talking about financial inclusion, you're talking about medical rights, So actually, you're looking at the lives that LGBT people live as a whole, right? Because we have rich lives like any other community in this country. So journeys for rights and for equality are always long, and they're always changing. But I'm very confident that we are on one, and I think all of us share that optimism that we are on that.
So, Akshay, I'll take this question to you. Post Suprio, we've also seen legislative changes or policy changes that may have come in. But the question really is implementation. Are we seeing any changes in governmental or attitudes of law enforcement agencies?
So I would actually begin with saying that this journey has been a lot more of perseverance, patience, and resilience. And it goes across spheres because as much as time the community is taking to understand and to make people feel proud about themselves and come together, we have to give equal and more time to even bring all the stakeholders together and partner with them to make them feel that they need to understand this, and we need to set, like we all have already mentioned, that there is a need to do this not because someone is to do charity on a community, it's because it is the right thing to do. It is because we exist, it is because the work that we have to collectively do, and like we all have been constantly listening, sabka saath sabka vikas, you cannot do this without having queer individuals being part of it. Having said that, there have been like many changes that have happened, and I'm not going to deny that there is a significant push when it comes to understanding the trans community in specific, because we have seen government introducing Garima Grahes, which are shelter homes for transgender community. Then there is a Smile project, which is to give people livelihood opportunities and also assisting them with entrepreneurship models and support them with those of the initiatives. Then there is also a lot of sensitivity with respect to state governments that has come out, because it's not just union government's job, and we have seen some progressive judgments across wherein even not just legislation but judiciary also has directed and ensured that you are protected, you are also safeguarded by multiple methods. And states like Chhattisgarh, they have supported the trans shelter home themselves. There is constant sensitization that they are doing with the police authorities. They became the first state wherein you are protected, and not just like in as a community, but you are protecting the others. Wherein transgender colleagues in police office, like who are in police, are supporting the cisgender by safeguarding them. And this is the change that we really look forward to in across states. We need to ensure that see change will not happen in exclusionary method. You have to bring everybody together. It is very important, because when you go back to section 377, when the ruling came out, Supreme Court said that it is important to take this judgment to every nook and corner of the society. That hasn't happened yet. It is important that in schools and colleges, whilst we see a lot of collectives in colleges now, whilst we see a lot of work happening through Gender Champions Club in colleges now, but it has to be more administrative work also, wherein schools and colleges proactively talk about the community and give them equal and more chances. There should be a lot more sensitization. And I personally believe that this is a journey wherein they have to holistically look at it, wherein even your RWs are talking about the community which has been marginalized for so many years. So the change is to bring everybody together, is to involve everybody in the process.
Let's also focus on the policy changes required to sort of push the ideas that require change in society. There is a high powered committee that was set up after the Supreme Court verdict. What kind of changes are we seeing after that? Because in February this year, the government told the Lok Sabha that several advisories have been issued.
Yeah, I think before answering that question, it's very important to recognize that, why Suprio did deny marriage equality, it did speak of discrimination as something that the community faces on account of gender or sexual orientation and non-recognition of their relationships. So the mandate of this committee is to address this discrimination on both grounds that have been noted in the judgment. I think, after the high-powered committee was set up, of course, there's been PIB notification that was released about certain measures that have been taken. One of them was, joint bank accounts. But to be honest, there was no prohibition on opening bank accounts jointly, irrespective of whether you're in a marital or a natal relationship or not. Of course, banks in their private policies sometimes mandate that, so it wasn't a new measure that was initiated as such. I think what was interesting was this measure in relation to ration cards, where they say you need to be treated as a joint household for the purpose of accessing a ration card for the PDS system. But I think what's really important, and that's something we've been thinking about and talking about, is that it's not enough to recognize that entitlement without articulating the process via which you access that entitlement.
Actually, that was going to be my next question, because
yeah.
when you have these advisories,
Correct.
that, well, fine, there is no prohibition in joint accounts, or
Yeah.
there is no that you can have a ration card. How does the law or the policy or actual implementation recognize who it is that is recognized as a partner? Arundhati, if you could,
I think some
how
of
is
this-
this being implemented?
Yeah,
here?
at this stage, a lot of it boils down to self-identification, right? And to some extent, because of the gaps in the law, it means that LGBTQ people have to proactively go out and identify their partners or the persons who they wish to take these decisions for them. And that's one of the reasons why we've advocated that marriage is so important, because marriage is that one legal relationship, social relationship, emotional, financial, familial relationship that it's like the cup in which all these things fall together, right? So when you don't have that, then the work has to happen piecemeal for an individual to create every kind of step of that relationship
So
for
basically,
themselves.
Effectively, if I may
Yeah, yeah.
ask this question, there is a petition in the Delhi High Court that came in recently regarding medical proxies, that
Yes,
partner should
yes,
be recognized
yeah.
as medical proxy. Are we seeing this as sort of a formalization that we to get different baskets of rights together as a recognition for the partnership? Is that what we're looking at here?
Well, yes, that petition did ask for medical proxies, and the Delhi High Court has issued notice on it and asked the government to respond. The fact is, ultimately, see, people's lives keep moving forward, right? Whether there is a legal framework or not, or recognition or not, we are here as we have always been here. And our lives, we will face the same challenges, and we do every day face the same challenges as everyone else. Our parents fall ill, and we look after each other's parents. Our partners fall ill, and we have to show up at hospitals and explain who we are, which you don't have to do if you're a married couple. In every way where your relationship is recognized when you're married, and I think sometimes for opposite sex couples, when you get married, you don't even realize that all these things are stepping in at the same time, right? If you're a government servant, your spouse passes away, you have pension. And so throughout your career, you have that little bit of assurance in your mind that the state is there to protect you. I think it's very important, because the basic point is that without these legal protections, our lives are very fragile. Even, your immediate concern is that if something happens to me or my partner, how do I ensure that the right person is taking decisions for me in a hospital? These are very, very basic questions that we are faced with right now.
So coming back now to the policy proposals that Vidhi has released very recently, of course, you've divided it into four sections. You're talking about familial relationships, you're talking about protection, you're talking about education, housing, financial, banking, all of these. One of the options that you're looking at in this proposal is recognition of civil unions, which is also something that the Supreme Court said that. How does the larger queer community see this division between marriage versus civil union?
I think the fact that you have two names for it itself tells you the difference. So, in many countries, civil unions have been the first way or the first step to recognize relationships. They have been an option both for opposite sex couples and for same sex couples in some countries, where people who may not want to marry or may not want the institution of marriage to have an alternative to that, right? So it's one option, and it's something which the report also talks about. But ultimately, marriage is a very important social institution, right? When I introduce someone as my partner, you still wonder whether I work with her. But when I say this is my spouse, you immediately understand what that person means, not only to me, but to my mother, to my father, to my bua, puppa, aunt. You know, you are part of my life. And as queer people, as gay people, we grow up in the same society and we have the same relationships and families as everyone else. We want the same respect, love, affection for our partners as any spouse does in an opposite sex relationship. Answer your other question, which is, are there different opinions on this in the queer community? Of course there are, right? Just as if you came to any other community in this country, whether it is based on caste, whether it's based on religion, whether it's across socio-economic divides, politically, you are going to find a divergence of views and a rich range of views, because that's this country, right? We are the argumentative Indians. But the solutions that we seek, the respect that we seek, the dignity that we seek for the individual, I think that is what unites us. And that remains.
When you say participation from government, who or what agencies, departments are you talking about?
So there is Ministry of Education, there is Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, there is Ministry of even Home Affairs, because they're responsible for even police protection. Then there is Ministry of Social Justice, which is actually the larger body under which all of this work is happening. And there is also Ministry of Financial Affairs. So they're all interlinked, and this is not just it is very vast, because there are rights and provisions that are interlinked with various other ministries also.
Yeah.
So this is not like there is one specific ministry, and this report basically will tell you that we have actually identified the nodal ministries and the agencies wherein with every right or every facility that we are
So
actually
that
recommending.
is the question that I'm asking. Since you say this report has been sent there, has there been any response, Namrata?
Just to kind of take off from what Akshay is saying, in terms of clarity, the high-powered committee is being chaired by the cabinet secretary, and there are 5 ministries that are represented. Home Affairs, there's Health and Family, there is Women and Child Development, there's Social Justice. And as our Arundhati said, marriage is an entry point to a bouquet of rights, and it has implications across all of these sectors. It's not simply about your recognition being, legible in the law. It's just that there are a range of rights that are linked to marriage. So I agree with Arundhati, when a particular right is extended to a particular social group and denied to another based on a protected ground under Article 15, I mean, that is discrimination 101, and that needs to be accessible to all. In terms of how, responsive the union has been, we have sent in our recommendations. And they have acknowledged that they've received these recommendations, so we have received that acknowledgement. I think now it's just a waiting game, and I think we're all used to that when we work with the government. We can't, give up on one avenue and prioritize another. And despite of, the hesitation that some people may have when it comes to engaging with the state, I think it's critical to do that. Because especially after Supreme, where the Supreme Court has said no to marriage, it has essentially passed the ball on to the legislature now. So it's very important for us to take this opportunity to engage with both the union and the state government. In fact, if you look at Tamil Nadu, right after Supriyo came out, Tamil Nadu was the first government that issued a draft gender and sexual minority policy. And one of the key features of that policy was providing a legislative framework for something that they call a deed of familial association, which may be similar to a civil union. Like Arundhati has said, civil unions are the starting point for marriage because, there are religious connotations to marriage, and so it becomes a bigger battle to fight. So it's not as if, governments are not responding, but I think it's very important for us to keep engaging with them. But what we need to recognize is that working with the government is a slow process, and that you will have to keep advocating, and you have to take every opportunity to engage with the union, different ministries, with the state, And when, of course, the government doesn't engage, you go to the judiciary. But in terms of the theory of change, you have to speak to all stakeholders.
Actually, that brings me to the next topic of conversation, really, the roadblocks, the issues, the concerns. Because a lot of the proposed policies also call for gender neutral laws when it comes to criminal laws, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to adoption, sexual harassment, maintenance, guardianship. You're going across the board when it comes to calling for a gender neutral law so that all relationships can be recognized. We've seen this debate happen on from the other side as well, where women's rights, family rights issue has come up. And the biggest roadblock there has been the idea that how do you define family? And if you're talking about changing these laws, what will it do to the larger Indian society? That is actually the argument that was given before the Supreme Court in one of these matters. How do you, as people working in the policy domain and as the larger debate on these issues, see these?
I mean, I think in terms of framing, I wouldn't say that we follow a gender neutrality. We think of it in terms of gender inclusion. I mean, and I know, there are debates in the women's movement specifically, because I think it's very important to recognize that in heterosexual relations, there is a power relation based on gender. And you can't deny that, which is why certain family laws, if you look at provisions on maintenance, the duty to maintain is on the man, right? Similarly, if you look at laws on sexual violence, again, the binary is upheld. The man is the perpetrator, the woman is the survivor or the victim. And of course, these are important things we need to think about. I wouldn't call them barriers or roadblocks, but I think these are things that required nuanced debate and thinking. So what we have done is that in course of our consultations, and I just want to flag, we spoke to around 150 people. At Vidhi, we have also engaged extensively with the women's movement, where these concerns have come up time and again. And these were difficult questions asked by the Supreme Court as well. What do you do with gendered provisions under the SMA? Because you can't deny the power relation that exists between a man and a woman. So our approach has been gender inclusion, where we need to recognize that yes, whatever we recommend shouldn't take away protections that are available to women. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that sexual violence is something that people face across gender identities. Ultimately, sexual violence is about power, right? And those power relations can exist beyond the gender binary. Trans people face sexual violence, as do men. So what we have recommended in relation to criminal laws is that we have all genders recognized as victims or survivors of sexual violence. In relation to, tricky things like maintenance, what we have said is that when the court is looking into, how to determine who gets maintained, instead of using sex as the sole criteria, which is now the criteria, you have a list of factors that allows you to identify who the more vulnerable party is.
Actually, that at least is changing a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can weigh in on this. Things are changing when it comes to, the responsibility to maintain, at least when it comes to the existing marital relationships that are recognized. How do you see these changes in the larger debate when it comes to gender relationships affecting the policy changes that that are there in these recommendations?
Yeah, I think, there's certain laws that were framed at a certain point in time with a certain understanding of what a marriage should be. So just, to give you just a way to think about this issue, we have strong protections against when it comes to sexual assault, the protection, POCSO, to protect children from sexual violence. And that protects boys till they are 18 years old. Then that same boy is 18 plus 1 day, and we think that he can no longer suffer from sexual assault or sexual violence in any way. So that 1 day changes the whole perception of this person who is still a young adult or a boy. So does the law then have a gap? And I think the other thing is that, of course, the law is looking at protections for women based on the fact that many times, in marriage, a woman may stop working after she has children, or be have to move with her husband and so on. So there are protections for maintenance, for example, to take something practical. But as women have started working, as they have left the house, their ability to work has also been protected with things like the Sexual Harassment Act, protections in labor laws, and so on. We now recognize that a woman's contribution to the home is financial as well, and that should be calculated when maintenance is being calculated. So that helps us to think about what kind of laws we want when same-sex couples or gender non-conforming couples are looking for legal protections. And so the way we think about the rights and obligations of each partner in where there are couples who are gender non-conforming or from sexual minorities, that also changes with time.
I just also wanted to add to what Arundhati said. I think we as a country now recognize in law that there are 3 genders, right? So you can't keep justifying binary laws when your legal system recognizes 3 genders. And I mean, it's simply the fact that, our legal imaginations have to keep evolving. We can't always use sex as a proxy and think that that's the only criteria on the basis of which you make laws.
So let's also now talk about the wins and the small joys, as you mentioned, that celebrating the small joys. If I can get this answer from all 3 of you, as a personal opinion, what do you see as the biggest change or biggest win in the last several months post Supreme? Akshay.
Okay, so I personally feel that every day when I get up and look at one person having a smile on their face and is able to live their queer self going to school or college is a personal win, because that is the confidence that we have been able to give to one individual, and I am sure there are so many, and it is so important for us to understand and acknowledge those silences at the same time. And the very fact that there is openness, there is love, there is hope, that people are coming together and wanting to have conversation now, which did not happen before, is something that I'm very, very hopeful and positive about. I'm very glad of the fact that in last 7 years, we have seen a massive movement. We have seen corporate organizations coming forward, introducing various policies, insurance schemes wherein the people beyond binary are getting recognized. I have seen individuals through our India Workplace Equality Index getting positive affirmative actions toward ensuring not only participation but also involvement. It's time that we reclaim our history back. In India, we have always been a very plural as well as a very resilient country, and it is a home for diversity. So when we talk about drag, when we talk about LGBTQ individuals, it is not something that is a Western import. It is something that has actually evolved out of our country. And when we are openly talking about these conversations involving people, we are actually talking about how much proud we are to belong to this country wherein all of this has emerged from.
All right, let me take this to Namrata. Your response to this. Something that you see as a positive shift post Supriyo, post these conversations.
I mean, I'll first answer as a lawyer. I think it's very important to realize that despite Supriya and Arundhati knows, I mean, there are very progressive judgments coming from high courts across the country, right?
We just saw the Madras High Court
Yeah,
saying
Madras
that family does
Sushma
not
versus.
Yeah.
So you have judgments on affirmative action, you have judgments on prohibiting surgeries on persons with intersex variations, you have judgments on conversion therapy, you have judgments that are talking about atypical families and why those need to be recognized. So as a lawyer, I think that, of course, Supriyo was a loss in some sense of the term, but that doesn't mean there hasn't been a domino effect with courts now, taking note of that as precedent. As a person in the community, I think what's been really great for me, and I think, again, the fact that we get to work together.
Yes.
I think despite everything, when we started this project, we didn't really know we would have 150 people joining in, and so many civil society organizations, and the queer community or communities rather. In course of this process, what I've seen is that post Supriyo, all of us have come into a room and had a conversation with each other, which I think is very important. For me, the fact that we are all coming together and we're working together not only in a professional capacity, but we have intimate relations as people in the community who understand each other's stories and attempt to support each other in ways as lawyers, as people, has been something that's been very joyous.
So yeah, Arundhati, if we may ask you for this.
So before I talk about the wins and the changes from government or from the court and the judiciary after Supriyo, I want to just pause for a moment and remember what that moment of losing Supriyo and losing marriage, right, has meant for the LGBT community, right, and for all of us here. So there were hopes, there were aspirations, there were dreams riding on that case, and I think not just for us but also for our families. Every parent has a dream to see their child settled in this country, and settled means you should have a good job, you should have a good marriage, and probably children, right? And losing Supriyo was a very disappointing, depressing setback, right? Not only for us, but for our families and for the community. And I think the fact that we're here thinking about what comes next, what are our next steps going to be, what have our moments of joy been, what does the work that we do mean, is a testament to the resilience of LGBTQ people in this country. So that's the first thing, because we went through a process where many people came forward in court. Arguments were heard over many weeks. But finally, the Supreme Court decided against us, and the government vehemently opposed marriage for transgender persons, for gender non-conforming persons, and for sexual minorities in this country. So let's just pause for a moment and remember that we are talking about what it means to come out of a loss. And I think the fact
Actually,
that
I remember on the day the verdict was
Came,
pronounced, the sheer number of people in the Supreme Court lawns. I mean, I was there. I mean, not just the media, but people from the community. People had come with their partners, people had come with their families. I remember this entire group of older ladies who had come with their children.
yeah,
Who were so disappointed. The sadness of not being able to see their child settled, as you just mentioned.
yeah.
We saw couples who were there, who were hoping that they had planned a wedding, they'd planned the entire family life post that, because
Yeah.
the hope was of a win. Is there some
Yeah,
change?
absolutely.
if
No,
any?
so the thing is, right, you come from this moment of loss, but I want to acknowledge that, okay? And I want to just pause for a moment to acknowledge the loss that we have suffered as a community, right? And so now when we think about what have we hoped for, what are our, what are the next steps that have happened, that we are hoping will happen, it comes on the back of that loss. Our parents, our family members, our friends, because they make that journey with us. When a child comes out or a young person comes out, and you come out to your parents, and then when your parents start acknowledging you and accepting you, and I can say this for my own parents, that they also come out with you, and they come out in a generation which had very different ideas about what gender minorities and sexual minorities, what it means to live that life. So what we're looking for ahead, a lot of that, of course, you see it in the richness of this report, which is that on the back of that loss, I think that the resilience of the queer community comes through, because now we are talking about the aspirations that we have to live this very full life, and for the fullness of our lives, whether it comes to our relationships, whether it comes to our workplaces, whether it's about ourselves in terms of our health, mental and physical, where we live, who we live with, that whole range, that spectrum of every nook and cranny of how we live our lives, to have dignity, to have equality, to have the Constitution recognize us as full citizens, and to have the state, the government, the judiciary recognize those rights which the Constitution grants us. You really see that aspiration reflected in this report, and kudos to everyone in the community who has participated in it, and now to the government and the judiciary who will now act when they see queer people and will make those changes, we hope, in the years and days and years to come.
We saw a very vehement stance, as you just said, by the government. We saw the court trying to create some sort of side road, so to speak, by suggesting civil union, by suggesting changes in specific laws. We also saw, as we just discussed, the sadness of the human person involved in this decision, because ultimately it is a judgment that said, well, I'm sorry, you cannot do what everyone else around you is doing. On a personal level, where do you wish that this is something we should focus on, and this is something that we may face opposition on? Amrita.
I think just, before answering that question, I just want us to recognize that we as queer people have lived our lives despite the law. I mean, for the longest time, we didn't really have, the law recognize us as individuals who deserve dignity. And we've been able to do that because we have been in communities of mutual support and care. And that continues to be the case now as well. We need to work in coalitions with each other. And I think that's true of any political movement, right? Like, you have to speak with each other and work with each other. And ultimately, that's how you create democratic pressure on the state. In terms of roadblocks, I think, first of all, and I think Arundhati has also spoken about this, is that, when it comes to change work, it is slow and it is often disappointing. The judiciary is unpredictable, right? Many people thought Supriyo would be a win. A lot of us, presumed after a certain point that, this is maybe low-hanging fruit, but then we were shown that's not the case. And so the judiciary is unpredictable. Engaging with the state also is a slow process. So I think we need to be very aware of that, and we are as communities aware of that. And despite that, we need to strategically keep engaging wherever we can. But as far as facing these roadblocks are concerned, I think we as communities will continue to do what we were doing always, which is that we will build coalitions, we will speak to each other, and we will put democratic pressure on the state to make changes, because ultimately we aren't asking for charity or welfare. We are asking for rights
recognition
that are
as any
guaranteed.
citizen of the country.
After Navteej Johar, after Nalsa, it's clear that you can't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. That is the position of law. Now it's about taking it to its logical end. I think another big challenge obviously is just systemic and structural change, right? I think it's very important for us to realize that law is but one small part of a big host of measures that need to be initiated to bring about change. And it's very important for us to also focus on what systemic change looks like. It could be as simple as rethinking medical curricula, which still pathologizes queer bodies. Ensuring that, when we as children go to school, we know that there are diversities of families as opposed to a mother and a father and a child. It's about having conversations with people in power and attempting to, change their mind about certain things while reminding them of their duty as state officials.
Akshay, your view on this?
So I would personally say it's very, very important, because firstly it's very important to bring everybody together, because even in our personal journeys here, I personally believe that recognition is the first stage. And a lot of individuals even out there, if you look at the larger demography that we are part of, not everybody is even aware of LGBTQIA plus now. It's not that we don't have role models, but we cannot be okay with having first trans lawyer, first LGBTQ medical practitioner. We need to build many more, and it is something wherein we would need support, because we don't want any child who can be this second doctor to drop out of the school because of no accessible restroom for transgender person. We don't want our children, when they are going to school, to feel discriminated because their parents are not recognized if they are queer parents. We don't want our children now to go to school and be like they are still taught in binary language, which is very difficult for somebody non-binary or non-conforming to be part of the classroom. It's time when they go for healthcare support, the doctor is not discriminatory, they're aware of their bodies. It is important that they converse with them, not in a language of just medical, but have level of empathy for them when they speak to them, understanding the challenges that they are having while growing up. It's very easy for all of us to talk about the future sitting here today, but there is a large chunk of the community who has been through these struggles from the past. It's time we support them also. We need to bring awareness about those communities, which is also important and is a responsibility of state, because this is what Supreme Court had asked them to, and it's time that they engage with the civil society organizations across country and come up with even more comprehensive and detailed report if there can be one more. This report should go to every ministry, this report should go to every individual nodal agencies who is responsible to make that work happen. They need to engage with civil society organizations, they need to ensure that people really find themselves. And when we talk about policies, why there are policies, they are to ensure that people are represented and reflected, and more than just being visible in policy, are celebrated for who they are. When we were also talking about the small joys, it gives us so much happiness to see Indian queer people to get married and looking at those visuals, but it makes me equally disappointed of the fact that these individuals are only getting married outside India because our country is not giving them that right now. What we need to do is that we need to make them feel belong to this country. We need them to take pride in getting married here. We need to ensure that, and it's not just about marrying and giving them sympathy. We are also restricting a lot of queer people from across globe to visit India, which is such a beautiful destination for people to come. It's time that we look at it holistically.
Actually, this was one of the aspects that was highlighted when these arguments were going on in the court also, that you're talking about the life of a human being, that giving them the space to live as anybody else does, and you're also talking about the larger economy, you're talking about their contributions to society, their contributions to economy, and the brain drain, because it is very real that whoever can manage to go abroad to a safer country will do so. But Arundhati, if we can take this question to you, the roadblocks, the issues, and what do you feel should be the focus going forward?
Sometimes, the biggest block is actually in how you imagine you can live your own life, right? What is the aspiration that a young adult today who is trans or gay, gender non-conforming, what is the aspiration that they have for the fullness of life that they can live, and very much about living in this country, so there are many of us who have who live here, work here, love here, and we are here because our parents, our teachers, our families are here, and this is our country. I mean, there's nowhere else to be. We are Indian, and we are here. And I think the roadblock, if you want to call it that, is when we don't see that life for ourselves, and very unfortunately when the state or the government, whose duty it is to enable all its citizens to live that rich, full, productive contribution, that life which makes a contribution back to our country, to provide all the support, the education, everything that is necessary to allow, we are very proud of our demographic dividend. Our young people are the biggest motivating change in this country today, and to allow them to live this full life here.
Can we talk about this situation where some people have gone outside and gotten married? What are the rights actually available to somebody in India who is married outside?
Today, Indian law does not recognize any kind of same-sex marriage anywhere in the world. So I think that's the short answer to your question.
So effectively where we are is waiting for a large section of Indian society to get the basic rights that the rest of the country takes for granted. The right to be recognized as a family, the right to take whatever decisions you want as each other's partner. And that is where these policy proposals are talking about smaller changes, breaking the law into what marriage, what family, what society means as far as legal principles are concerned. In New Delhi, this is Anisha Mathur for India Today.